So good afternoon. My name is Emmeline Brady, and I'm a financial management specialist at the World Bank. I'm delighted to be facilitating this session on state-owned enterprises and maximizing finance for development. We are very fortunate to have with us in this panel Mr. Arismendi Leong in the middle, the Manager of Controls, Risk and Compliance at the Panama Canal Authority. Then right next to me, Mr. Álvaro Castaño Oltalvaro, the Vice President of Corporate Strategy of Empresas Públicas de Medellín in Colombia. And at the very end of the stage, Mr. Henri Fortin, Lead Financial Management Specialist at the World Bank. So I'm going to introduce our panelists in a little bit more details before we dive into the subject. So Mr. Leong has 35 years of experience in the area of audit, risks, accounting, tax, and finance. Among other positions, he has been chief accountant and personal supervisor for the financial group Austrobank overseas in Panama. And he also was a senior tax specialist for the audit firm Deloitte. He's also a master's degrees professor of various chairs related to his career, and is also a local and international lecturer. So in his current position, Mr. Leong supports the achievement of strategic objectives of the Panama Canal Authority through comprehensive risk management and good corporate governance practices. So, welcome. During the last 23 years, Álvaro Castaño Oltalvaro has worked for Empresas Públicas de Medellín, and he held various positions in this company, such as Assistant Manager of Administration and Finance Energy Distribution, Deputy Commercial Manager of Gas, Subdirector of Planning, International Business of Energy, and Manager of Electric Power Growth, and is currently responsible for directing the formulation of the strategy, the objective, and the growth route for Empresas Públicas de Medellín Group, and ensuring its deployment and monitoring. Welcome. And finally, Mr. Henri Fortin is an international expert in corporate governance, reporting, auditing, and state-owned enterprise with extensive experience in Africa, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia, and Latin America and the Caribbean. From 2011 to 2016, he headed the World Bank Center for Financial Reporting Reform in Vienna. Between 2003 and 2009, he led the World Bank's program on reports on the observance of standards and code for accounting and auditing in Latin America and the Caribbean, and he was also head of the CRECER initiative, so he's the father of this initiative. So he participated in several joint World Bank and International Monetary Fund sector assessment program missions and state-owned enterprise-related projects. And currently, he is a lead member of the World Bank SOE coordination group, and he worked on SOE, corporate financial reporting and audit reform, primarily in Africa. He's a member of the International Auditing and Assurance Standard Board consultative advisory group representing the World Bank. And finally, as an auditor, he specialized in audit of international groups and due diligence, mainly in developing countries. Welcome. So with these three panelists, we are going to take a deep dive into the subject of state-owned enterprises and maximizing finance for development. This topic is of the utmost relevance, as in many countries around the world, state-owned enterprises remain an important presence and account for approximately 1/5 of the world's stock market capitalization. More specifically, in our region, in Latin America and the Caribbean, the SOE sector contributes significantly to the gross domestic product, but also represents an important part of the consolidated public expenditures. In several cases, the SOEs are also key actors and strategic actors in a country's economy, providing goods, providing services, and frequently hold a dominant position in sectors such as transport, electricity, or petroleum. They also operate in markets such as, in competitive markets such as financial services or telecommunications. So now, SOEs are increasingly under the pressure of both government and the international competition to operate and achieve their goals efficiently and effectively. With this context, achieving good corporate governance practices is critical for SOEs to effectively provide goods and services and achieve their short, medium, and long-term goal within a sustainable fiscal framework. Then the second part of the subject we are trying to link today is the maximizing finance for development. So this is an approach that asks the World Bank Group to help countries maximize their development resources by drawing private financing and sustainable private sector solutions to provide value for money and meet the highest environmental, social, and fiscal responsibility standards, and reserve the scarce public financing for those areas where private sector engagement is either not optimal or not available. So hence, good corporate governance, which includes financial reporting and financial accounting, is a critical success factor to effectively mobilize private funds for SOEs. So in this session, we'll hear from the panelists focusing on how SOEs can be an attractive partner for the private sector. And with this, I will stop and I will yield the floor to our first panelist, Henri Fortin.
Gracias, Emily.
Emmeline just explained it, but this morning I think in particular our colleague from the IDB explained that the challenge that the continent faces in terms of infrastructure is the need to have thousands of millions of dollars in the future, while the capacity of the governments to finance are in tens of millions. So the idea is to leverage the financial capacity of the government to get these higher figure numbers that we know are reality in culture. We are missing electric infrastructure, roads, railroads, and others, the different networks. So the discussion today between the link between corporate governance and MFD, I am going to use this abbreviation MFD, which is very important. For me, comes from three perspectives. There are three linkages. And I have a broader interpretation than the strict definition of maximize, which is a criteria is completely quantitative, but it also has a qualitative criteria. So the first linkage, the first has to do with the long-term funding of public enterprises. As Emily mentioned, public companies operate most of the commercial infrastructure that belong to the state, but we need to pay for them. We have to pay for electricity, water. We have to pay to use a railroad. So, you know, in your countries, the companies that operate these infrastructures are mostly state-owned. And also the extractive assets, such as Codelco in Chile, is an example that we'll mention quite several times. Petrol companies, airlines, communication companies, such as here in Costa Rica. The state-owned company to invest, to renovate their infrastructure, expand it, replace it when there are new needs. And for this purpose, they need funds. But these are parts of the hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars that have to be mobilized for these investments. Today, the countries cannot finance this, governments cannot do it, because according to the statistics of the colleagues from the International Monetary Fund, debt have increased so much. Public debt, for instance, in the emerging countries have grown in average last month up to 53% of the GDP. So this is much better than the industrialized countries, which are not giving a good example, which are closer to 100%, including the U.S. and my country, France, which is, I'm a terrible student in this area, but the reality is that the governance capacity to finance their public enterprises is very limited. So today's need to be able to face at least part of this funding of infrastructure is for the companies to be self-sufficient, to be able to finance their long-term assets, their acquisitions, long-term acquisitions. How they do it? There are two basic ways to do so. One, through commercial loans, and the other one through value market, the stock market. We had in 2017 in Mexico Crecer, in the case of Isabel, that come from Brazil, you know this company very well. They say that it's the third largest company of water. For more than 20 years ago in the stock market of Sao Paulo, and it has more than half of its capital in the hands of private shareholders. So we are going to listen to this topic from our colleagues in the panel, APM and the Authority of the Panama Canal. First is the collecting finance through market capital or private loans. Another case we hold is the sanitation works of the government of Uruguay. The World Bank has supported efforts for this company to get a score, a Fitch credit score, which A minus, which is a high score, will allow us to get an interest rate of 4%, which of course is very low. This is the first reason. The second reason that introduces the qualitative criteria is that in most of these investments are managed by public enterprises. It is important for these companies to be well managed. They have to be efficient and effective, that the quality of their services has to be high, both for citizens and the companies that operate in the national market. So there are two considerations here. Consideration about the quality and the price of service, but also the consideration from the perspective of the state owner, which is profitability. And it's the second consideration that is relevant in the issue terms of financing. Because if the company has losses, this is going to require the government that we know has limitations in its capacity to get funds. They will have to finance these losses. They will have to finance also liquidity problems using funds that in fact are not going to be made available for education, health, and environmental policies. In the case of Codelco that I mentioned, if the company is successful, it is well managed, it is exactly the opposite situation. It's a source of resources. It brings to the state resources to be able to finance these other public policies, to be able to finance other infrastructure. And happily, we know that the companies that operate extractive assets are companies that are not like Codelco, that in fact have losses. So there is a long empirical basis to say that an improvement in corporate governance would allow and would create more effective conditions and more creation of value. In fact, this is a definition of the good corporate governance. It is a set of mechanisms that aims at creating long-term value. For whom? For the state and all the citizens. And our aspect of particular is how strategic investment projects are managed. This is even more important because it is directly relevant from the perspective of the MFD. And a third point, these are the 6 dimensions of good corporate governance based on the guidelines of OECD that we use as a reference framework, very relevant for Costa Rica that wants to be a member of OECD. The 6th point is the one that brings about the third linkage between corporate governments and public entities on one side and the MFP on the other hand, because one of the main ideas of this leverage of the state's capacity to finance long-term assets is to bring private stakeholders in markets that today are only in charge of public stakeholders. For this to be possible, there have to be competitive rules of the game that level the playing field to have a true competition going on. This means that, for instance, the state should not grant undue advantages to public companies through favorable financing, market reserves, privileged access for public procurement, subsidies that do not really cover social activities that are required from private companies, to the point that without considering MFD, why is this in the set of corporate governance, the issue of market discipline? It's because it is important for public enterprises to act like public enterprises, for it not to receive artificial support from the government, for them to be truly able of performing as if they were a stakeholder in the private market. So the corporate governance perspective and the MFD perspective, in this sense, have the same objective, which is to really bring about a market discipline as to how public enterprises are managed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henri. We are going to move on to our next panelist. So, Arismendi Leong from the Panama Canal Authority.
Thank you,
Organizers of this incredible Congress for all the initiatives and solutions that are being presented since this morning and throughout the day. Probably what we would like to do this afternoon is to share the experience of the Panama Canal for what we believe a positive funding, a private funding experience. And I say we believe it to be, because the truth is the decision to get funds is a risky decision, as any risk decision is based on objectives that the organization has, in our case, the Panama Canal. So we wanted to achieve a goal. We want to assess the risks to be achieve this goal. We needed external funds. We got external funds, and for us it was a successful experience. We were able to finance $2 million for the expansion of the Panama Canal that concluded 2 years ago, and we issued financial instruments, specifically bonds of $450 million. Both, again, are considered by us to be successful and a positive experiences. So I would like to share with you what we have achieved that for us was very positive. And I say for us because ultimately I'm going to show you the interest rate that we received for these loans. And some might say, but maybe this is expensive. Others will say it's cheap. So that's relative. It's relative to your goal, what it is that you want to achieve as an enterprise. And I am moving along the lines to what Henri said. How do we manage this? By the fact that we are a government, state-owned company, we operate as a private company, because the first thing is that the canal has something to offer to the world. That's our premise. We are not a state government sitting there not doing anything. In fact, our vision is the one that is noted here, to be first the keystone for global maritime transportation. Through the Panama Canal, 5% of the international trade goes through the Panama Canal. 5% of international trade doesn't sound like a lot, but if you take into account everything that it represents in millions of dollars, then 5% for us is a lot. And such a small country such as Panama. Before the expansion of the canal, we had 3% of that trade, and with the expansion, we increased it to 5%. So that's the starting point. We manage practically, although being a state-owned company, as a private company, which we have high standards of governance. For instance, in the regulatory framework that governs us, despite being an SOE, we are covered under Title 14 of the Panama Constitution, which is exclusive for the Panama Canal, which establishes at the constitutional level how we will operate, how it will be managed, and how it will be controlled. In addition to this, there is an organic law that establishes the entity as authority of the Panama Canal that sets the guidelines as to how it should operate, and even most important, we ourselves self-regulate. We establish our own standards and procedures based on the best practices. For instance, right now we are betting on a diversified business portfolio because when you think about the Panama Canal, where ships go through, that's true. That's our core business. That's our main business. But we are also thinking how to take advantage of the competitive advantage of all those ships, of that 5% of international trade that go through the canal, to see how much we can get, how much can stay in Panama. That's why we have an SOE that needs to be diversified. We have efficiency and reliability from operational perspective, where I mentioned we can have something to offer. If you see the curve of our income, the kind of since the transfers to now, the curve slopes upward. To have an idea, in the last year of the American operation, you might remember that the canal belonged to the federal government of the U.S. until 1999. What was paid of dividends in Panama was about $200 million. Just last year, the Panama Canal contributed directly to the government of Panama $1.7 million. And for us, this is something that makes us proud, because at the time of the transition of the canal, people thought that if Americans were managing in that way, the Panamanians, will they be able to do it? The 10,000 employees, most of whom can do it, we have managed the canal very efficiently. We have another project that we finance. We asked for loans from multilateral entities, $23,000 million as a risk venture, not just for the Panama Canal, but also for the multilateral entities themselves, including the IDB and the World Bank, who participated in the project. It's a huge challenge, but however, this challenge is giving its fruits. For you to have an idea, it's 0.5 here. The expansion of the Panama Canal increased significantly our competitive global position. From 3%, we moved upward to 5% in the international maritime trade. But not just that. For you to have an idea, the canal has an annual revenue of about $3 billion. Almost 50% of this revenue is generated by the extended canal, the new canal, as whatever you want to call it. Hadn't we done this expansion, hadn't we taken the risky decision, hadn't we had that vision of the future company, of private company, we wouldn't be where we are right now. Very quickly, a little bit about the best practices that we believe that we're implementing. We are once again an SOE, which are highly independent, beginning with the Constitution of the Republic. In other words, the government, from a perspective of political decisions, doesn't have a say in how the canal operates. I like what it's on the left, because this morning it was mentioned that for these issues of finance, there has to be a decision of the government, because state decision, because governments change every 4 or 5 years. So what is important is the continuity on the state. So at the canal, this is an issue of republic, not a government, not a state. It's a national issue. And once again, going back to the issue of transition of the canal in 1991, that nobody was betting a single cent on Panamanians, we decided that that was something of national pride. The success of this company that is called the Panama Canal really does not depend on the 10,000 workers that work there, but of all Panamanian citizens that as one decided to shield the Panama Canal to provide the best service, being aware that the canal provided an international service. And this is how we have other things, such as our law allows us to lien assets as security or make loan money to foreign companies. So the government cannot take our money and say, those profits that you have, I'm going to ask for a loan using you as a security. No, it doesn't work like that. When we started asking international funds, the concern of the multilaterals and even potential buyers of bonds was not the financial soundness of the canal. It was how much the government could interfere with the financial soundness of the canal. And fortunately, we're able to sell the idea in the right way. So it's not an issue of government, it's an issue of the Republic of Panama. So some of those high governance, corporate governance standards are monitoring by ourselves. For instance, when the risk scoring agencies come to us and say, well, you have probably gone through those assessments, we can answer in a very positive way many of the questions in terms of best practices at an international level. For instance, the Panama Canal operates through its an accounting system. It's done by implementing the IFRS. We have external audits that are contracted by the board of the canal, not the administration of the canal, which it rotates every certain while. We're restricted to the 4 largest, most important companies of the world according to the scoring standards. So we implement these kinds of standards that guarantee that when a scoring entity comes to us for a score, we say, well, this is our presentation letter in terms of risk. We follow the ISO 31,000, which are 2017, which are the best practices also used by the private companies. Now to conclude, because I'm running out of time, for you to have an idea, at the beginning I talked about diversification. We want the canal to be something more that a shape pathway. We are working on several projects. We have 1,200 hectares around the canal, which are almost ready to be used, and we have analyzed the risk in the short and medium-term projects that could be developed there. Here are some of them listed, such as a container terminal, another container terminal on the Pacific, a roll-on, roll-off port for cars, a logistics park where the merchandise that goes through the canal should not just do that, but could be downloaded from the ships and processed in Panama to continue moving the national economy, movement of bunkers, and so on. So part of what happened is that with the expansion of the canal, we only had an increase of liquid gas, something that we had projected, but not at the level we are having. And this is really a positive problem for us, because now we want to take advantage of that this is giving us to have natural liquefied gas terminals in our country. So as you can see, these are ambitious projects, but they are aligned with what we are talking about here in this presentation. Because of these projects, we hope could be implemented through private funds, in which the canal could be a concessionaire of many of these activities. So this is what the Panama Canal is.
Thank you very much, Arismendi. That was very, very informative on how the Panama Canal Authority was able to go to market and to raise funds to continue its expansion and its operation. So now I'm going to give the microphone to Álvaro Cataño Alvaro, who is going to present us about the Empresas Públicas de Medellín and the way it operates.
I would like to start by telling you briefly what EPM is. EPM has operations in 6 countries: Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Panama, Chile, and Colombia. And it is a company that has operations in what we call 7 business lines. It is in the electric energy generation, transmission, and distribution of electric energy, in the distribution of natural gas. In the water sector, we have in the supply of drinking water and the management of wastewater. And we are also involved in the business of solid waste management. And so far, it's nothing special. What is special about this group is that the matrix is 100% owned by the municipality of Medellin. It is a state-owned company, but at the municipal level. So we are a state, but really a local government. And this has differences with other companies that are owned by the central government. Today we have about 6.5 million clients in all of the countries where we are located. We reach about 20 million people. We have 30,500 direct employees, and last year we had $1.35 million revenue. Through its growth and its growth strategy, EPM has incorporated partners to its affiliates. But in these affiliates, we have partners both at the public and the private level. In Guatemala, for instance, our partner is the state and also private entities. In El Salvador, we have private shareholders. In Panama, we are partners with the Panamanian government, and so on in different countries. We have different participation from different stakeholders. EPM went from being a local company that provided services to the city of Medellin to become a regional entity to the Antioquia province in the year 2000. Later on, we grew at a national level by buying companies and taking advantage of the market opportunities and the openness of the regulation of the electric sector and buying companies that belong to the Colombian state. In 2010, we entered the international arena by buying companies in Central America, Mexico, and Chile. So we wonder how a municipal company that has more limited resources than a state company could grow. Well, the truth is that there is not one explanation, but many. Several factors can help explain. I am going to try to illustrate some of them briefly. Not all, but I'm going to just point out some of them. First, since its foundation, there was a partnership that we call public-private partnership today, but at that time it was a partnership between the companies and political people in office at the time, and they agreed to create an autonomous company independent from the municipality management. And that independent company or autonomous company had two characteristics: a business long-term vision and something that for us is obvious, which was separate accounting, separate financial reportings for each business line that would allow since the beginning to focus on the profitability and efficiency of the services that were provided. Today we have a corporate governance that has implemented the world's best practices, for which I would like to point out something that is relevant. There is an agreement between the owner, which is the municipality of Medellin, and the company EPM. This agreement of will grants the company financial and administrative autonomy. The mayor, who is the chair of the board by law, has to select first the manager according to preset criteria. The board of directors is made up by independent members also with following certain predetermined criteria, and the selection of the owner is done by the board, not by other entities. On the other hand, the company, since it is autonomous, responds by having clear management goals, results that we call transfers, which are the profits or dividends that are taken back to the owner. In fact, today, 25% of the municipality investment budget depends on the transfers or dividends that EPMs bring. So it's a crucial part of the city's development. Another commitment is communication through its different stakeholders. And this has to do with transparency, with the opportunity and the truthfulness of the information provided to all the stakeholders. We are also committed to being transparent in the selection of the staff of the directors and all of the professionals, and transparent in contracting. Throughout the day, we have been talking about transparency, but this sometimes becomes obvious, it becomes part of the landscape, but it's really what allows us to build trust and attract investors. On the other hand, the company also commits, just like the case of the Panama Canal, with an external audit at the top level. So in general terms, the agreement grants autonomy but with responsibility, and the local government is committed to having a specific input through the work of the board of directors by setting aside the political interests in the performance of the company. Another element that I would like to stress is the issue of the long-term vision that is part of a strategic vision. The strategic direction is compounded by 4 elements. First, we have a defined purpose that is aligned with sustainable development goals, with the architecture for a better world. Then you would wonder, well, this is like philosophy. Yes, it's philosophical, but it is a cluster frame factor of the elements of the strategy and the activity of the company. This is what links, what encourages, and what makes us want to come to work every day. Another important element is the identity through our values and purposes, which have to do with our responsible act to society and by reporting transparently our management. And of course, we have the strategic statements as any other private company, but we also make visible as part of our strategy our results, our outcomes, and they have to do with the sustainable development goals, with very large ambition goals that we call MEGA, which bring the vision of the future to the company and the challenges. We also use the regular indicators through the strategic objectives through different mechanisms that allow us to manage and monitor our company on a permanent basis. Another element that has facilitated the company's performance is the institutionality. And we have to mention here that in the case of Colombia institutionality, there is a separation between the regulator and the control and the service provider, so that the roles are clearly defined. The service provider is in charge of providing services efficiently according to the regulator's requirements, and they have to follow the controls that are imposed on them. On the other hand, this separation allows the service providers not to give subsidies. Subsidies are somewhere else, and in this field, public and private partnerships compete under equal conditions. There are no privileges for the public companies. We compete in equal terms. Another important element of the institutional aspect is made up by the citizens' control. Citizens' control means that citizens, since they feel owners of the company because they are the ultimate owners, they take care of the company. They express their opinions about the company's behavior, and this is important point. Is one of the most important stakeholders for us because they are the ones that truly issue ideas that need to be considered when managing the company. Finally, I would like to talk about, in the chart you can see in the middle, what we call the shared value or for the different stakeholders. I would like to stress something. You can see from the $0.29 million that were shared last year, 70% go to the owner, which means that the owner has a limit. You cannot get all of the company's profits, and this is very important, as it also happens in the Panama Canal. There is a large percentage devoted to reinvestment, which is vital for a company that has to be constantly making investment because of the infrastructure that it is to create in energy and water and the maintenance that this requires. There is another important element, which are the financial lenders. 14% we use the general bank, the multilateral bank, or the commercial bank. So since we are autonomous, we are independent, which means that the city of Medellin does not give us one single peso. On the other hand, we give profits back to the municipality of Medellin. And another point I would like to stress in the explanation of performance, which has to do with people. Ultimately, management is in the hands of people, and this means that people have to have the capacities and skills that are necessary to do their job, in addition to a motivation, of course. But it is essential for these people to be up to date. We are facing a very competitive world and a disruptive world. In the case of energy, we have the non-conventional renewable energy, the Internet of Things, the distributed energy. These are many things. There are many challenges that that require that our manpower has a permanent updating and special skills. This is the end of my participation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alvaro. So in the interest of time, because we started a little late, I'm going to open the floor to the questions now, so that we can have a productive discussion. So, could we have a microphone?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your explanations. I would like to ask you to elaborate about the tariff scheme that you use in your companies. For instance, here in Costa Rica, we work based on costs. So I would like to know how you manage in each of your companies and what is the relationship with the commercial loans, or if you try to seek other funds to make the projects bankable. Well, in the case of the Panama Canal, I just mentioned that the canal has the authority to self-regulate its prices. So we set the price. So we basically set the price, the toll rate. We have divided our income by segment, which basically are the different kinds of ships, if it is bulk or chemical transport, and so on. So at the canal, we really charge according to the load capacity of the ship. According to this capacity and the amount of cargo that they have, we set a tariff that they know in advance. In fact, this is an interesting question for us, because after 1999, when we got control of the canal to the Panamanian hands, we have had a history of about 5 times in which we have increased the toll prices. We don't do it unilaterally. We have a council, a group of consultants. In fact, last week, the consulting board met in Panama. They are representatives of the international maritime trade or commerce, and we asked them, and this is the cost of the route, because we are charged according to their route of the per hour for the Panama Canal for this kind of segment. So we undergo with a consultation process with our main users, and then we come to reach an agreement as to the price. Definitely the price has to do with the level of income and therefore of the profits that we have, the profitability that we have as a company. The Panama Canal has a profitability of about 42%, which is very good. And of course, this is a presentation for multilaterals or any potential investor. In the case of the services provided by EPM, which is basically in the sectors of energy, gas, and water, there are regulatory commissions that set the prices. How do they do that? In the energy generation sector, there is an open market, and there are prices that are spot prices based on offer and demand and supply. Of course, there are regulations that give us the framework as to how to compete. To elaborate a little bit, in Colombia, for instance, there are for large entities generating agencies, we have more or less 25% of the market. And the other 3 agents are private generators. And we compete in equal conditions. So this is where the generation price comes from. In terms of trust or monopoly, the Commission set the fees according to the necessary investment and also the profitability that they consider necessary. But of course, this requires a discussion between the operators and the regulator. But there is an understanding that the service provision has to facilitate the expansion, the continuity of the service, and it has to make the operator profitable regardless of whether it is public or private. The case is that the operator has to be efficient so that through its management it can provide the adequate service and achieve the right profitability. Otherwise, it runs on its cost. That is the tariff system that works there for regulated services. I would like just to add that obviously, the Panama Canal is a monopoly, but it's not. They are not, ships are not mandated or obliged to go there through the canal. So when there is an organized market, there are many countries are dreaming about having a market with using spot prices of electricity, competition in distribution and generation. This is the minority of the cases. In most cases, we are in situations of a monopoly. This is a very complicated matter. Many countries are still trying to resolve it, but a very important ingredient. You mentioned, of course, the role of the regulators. Regulators are independent, more or less. They don't have power from an economic perspective. There is a whole issue that has to do with the role of the regulators, but the ideal is transparency, that there should be consultation. It's very difficult to compare the water sector. It's even more complicated because it depends on the physical conditions, but I think that the ingredient of transparency in terms of consultancy is very important. There are countries in which you can see that there is still a lot to do in these areas. Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a question for APM, where you tell us that the prices are set by the regulator. But I understand that there are always subsidies, and in the case of the subsidies to the prices, do the prices include the subsidies, or is a special treatment for EPM? And my question is, the second question is, if the companies in the rest of Central America operate similar to APM Medellin, or they are separate business lines. Let me start with the issue of subsidies and rates. Subsidies are not granted by the companies participating in the business operation. This is independent, defined by the government. That is, the rate is made up based on cost. How much are the assets, how much does it take to operate, and what is the profitability. For certain socioeconomic strata, there are subsidies, but those subsidies are granted by the government, not by the operator. So there is no differential treatment for the public or the private operator, which is an issue that is important because subsidies ultimately are allowed to the state. And of course, the regulator always tries to get efficient prices, not just to decrease the subsidies, but also to encourage the optimization of the operator's operations. So that is the first question. In terms of tariffs and subsidies as not included in the cost, this is something separate granted by the government, and operators have nothing to do with the subsidies. Regarding the companies, if they are business, yes, we are also a business. EPM headquarters is also a business, and we behave like any other business entity. We try to work as closely to a private company as possible, but of course we have certain public requirements that we have to fulfill, but we try to behave as a private company. But we have something that we call as DNA, in which we implement corporate social responsibility, understood as a balance between the economic, the social, and the environment, the triple bottom line, not confusing it with charity or assistentialism, because these two ways of management are not self-sufficient, they are not sustainable. So we are a business, and we act as such whatever geography we are, but always assuming the corporate social responsibility commitments. Good afternoon. First, I would like to congratulate the companies because you have a good business model, In fact, it is not what is noticed in all countries, and I am from Peru. Even in Ecuador, they are discussing if all of the companies should follow the IPSAS model, because otherwise it wouldn't be sustainable. Anyhow, when we talk about benefits, profits, or profitability or earnings, it is not clear at the level of the companies, but I would like to know your experience. What do you call benefits? Is it from the financial perspective or maintaining physical capital? Because many companies in Peru distribute profits or dividends to the controller without assuring the replacement of their operating capital. And ultimately, they are actually giving out their capital. But then they ask the government for more resources. So this is an interesting phenomenon there. And the other one is the companies that are not self-sustainable and are trying to implement the IPSAS assume that they will not have good funding opportunities, because when they want to get capital, they feel that following the IPSAS model is not sellable, unlike when they are in the terms of IFRS. So how have you managed this issue of the regulatory framework of information? In the case of the Panama Canal, when we talk about profits, in fact, www.micanaldepanama.com, you can go in and you can look at the latest audited financial statement, and you can see the income statement and the balance sheet and how profits are set. When we talk about those $1.7 million that we give to the government of Panama, this is after taking out from the income what we call the equity reserve. With equity reserve to improve the plant, we are a production plant that is more than 100 years old, so we have a high maintenance cost, despite the fact that we have renovated it. So we take out all the costs, all of what we are going to invest in maintenance and investment projects and in purchase of floating equipment. We even have some additional reserves, thinking, as Alvaro mentioned, about the future and the strategic plan. So after we take away all of these reserves, there are $1.7 million that are sent to the government of Panama. This is what's happening, or at least this is what happened last year. Regarding your second question, this is a difficult issue, really, because and I don't think that none of the presenters here can give you a single recommendation. My recommendation would be try to improve your corporate governance, try to follow the best international standards, try to implement best practices to be able to showcase ourselves outside. We have to have something to sell. We have to look good. So before trying to get, maybe they are not going to do well, so let's get ready so that we can do better. Let's invest something in corporate governance, in best practices, to be able to really get something that is worth it for the entity and the country. That's a very good question about the investment and how we can get sufficient capital or sufficient resources to replace the infrastructure or to expand the services. Let me give you some details that derive from the corporate governance. The City Council is the one that defines the EPM's bylaws, and these bylaws define the maximum profit that can be transferred to the municipality. To change that, there would be a huge political debate, because this is part of the sustainability and the continuity of the company. So ahead of time, we know what percentage of the profits can be distributed annually, which is a lot for a city like Medellin. On the other hand, in the framework agreement between the owner and the company, EPM, there is also a statement and that says that distributing profits depends on the company's financial conditions. In other words, we have to secure this company's financial sufficiency, liquidity sufficient, and this starts by having the resources to build the necessary infrastructure, the replacement of the structure, and maintenance of the structure. So in the case of the information standards, for us it was essential to adopt the IFRS very quickly. First, because we have no other resources. We don't get resources from the municipality or the Colombian government. We are an autonomous entity. So we needed to clearly show how transparent we are following the universally accepted standards. So that's how our financial statements are prepared. So in 2014, we started using the IFRS. And this has allowed us to get resources from the commercial banks and multilateral banks. And to conclude, as Arismendi mentioned, the issue of corporate governance is essential. The clarity with which you make decisions, the balance of power is essential. It is essential for a private company. It's even more for a public company. Good afternoon, everybody. Congratulations to the panelists. You have developed the topic very well. As part of the supervision, and I am talking on behalf of the account supervisor of Honduras, what I would like to know is how you manage as SOEs the competitiveness versus the regulation, because in my country, we are regulated by the state contracting law that has a very broad framework, and still this is what happened with our companies, that when they compete with private companies that are not governed by such stricter regulation, how do you manage this? If you have regulations, if you do, if you don't, how were you able to, as we say, to not have to implement the regulation, because for supervision purposes it applies? All of the questions really have been very interesting. Thank you. And this is part of what has been harder for us. For instance, that's why I said that more than a government decision, it's a government of a country decision. Why? Because the Panama Canal doesn't follow the public contracting law of the Republic of Panama. We have our own contracting regulation that is exclusive to the Panama Canal. This doesn't mean that I am not an SOE. If I have to enter into an agreement, I have to go through a bidding process. I have to follow the bidding process as any other government entity. However, we self-regulate in that sense. We have a regulation for contract that responds to international standards. Since we are a federal company, we inherited the discipline that the federal government of the U.S. had and we still use the similar framework as a reference point. This is why I was saying this is a decision, a country decision, as to what authority or what authority is going to be delegated, what separation, what independence is going to be given to the company for it to operate. And what was the second part of your question? That was it. Thank you. In the case of EPM, we have the same conditions in general for contracting as a private entity. Although we are public, we are an industrial commercial company of the state, we also self-regulate and we follow many of the requirements of public contracting. What does this mean? It means that in some cases, we are not as speedy or agile as we would like to be, but we do have the transparency to manage public funds. And your question makes me remember something that we talk about in Colombia, which is that public officers do what the law allows them to do, what is especially written in the law, and the private does everything except what violates the law. And there is a substantial difference right there. This makes a difference, undoubtedly. For instance, public officers respond with their equity. The private company doesn't have that problem. These conditions have to be considered when people work for a public entity. They have to be aware of what the responsibility is and what they are facing, undoubtedly. On the other hand, they have incentive when you work in a public entity, at least in the one I work, that what we do, the profit that the company makes is translated into well-being for the community because they are directly invested by the municipality into programs for the community. This is like the two sides of the same coin. I would just like to add that this is a topic that we have discussed a lot at the World Bank because on the other hand, on one hand, it's obvious that imposing the law of the contracting law, such as a company that are represented here, it goes against everything that is related to autonomy, responsibility, and agility to compete. But on the other hand, I should have mentioned the case of Lavaretto that was mentioned. What was the gap in acquisitions, in procurement, and the reasoning was to get support on the internal procedures. But we just have to see how strong these procedures are. We have to look at the circumstances and the environment. So this is a complicated issue because on the one, imposing the letter of the law or applying an instrument that is not designed for the same purpose. So we have to see under what conditions, and I think that these two companies are the best. If we have Sabesa and Hipoderco, we have the 4 stars in the continent. Maybe next, let's say, we should invite them all. Well, anyhow, this is an issue under discussion that is very important for those who have not yet gathered resources from the international market and international score, which of course are available. There are different models. As I was saying, the colleague that in CRECER 2007, we talked a lot about EPM. We had a session about this public-private partnership, so I congratulate you because we are really very good examples for the rest of the continent. I have a question that goes along the line, financial reporting and auditing standards. And I am addressing Henri first. Henri, tell me first about your experience at the global level, how SOEs have been evolving in terms of financial reporting and auditing standards. How good are they? How bad are they? Is there a scheme? Is there a panorama? And then specifically in Latin America and the Caribbean. Well, I was teasing our colleague from Peru here. You are from Peru, right? Because in 2007, and Dr. Bergen knows that we discussed this, and he said if public companies have to use the IPSAS, whether to be or not to be, I think that next I said we should discuss it in detail, but the criterion, because I think that in Peru they have debated this a lot. It is clear that a company, a commercial company that sells services has to apply the IFRS. That is for profit. We have to define what the for-profit means, but to get and do dividends that make the balance of the company vulnerable. But it's not an excuse to not to apply the IFRS. It's poor management of the capital, of the equity. So many public companies in the world are using the IFRS because they have many needs. Many of them have to get money from the market, and of course today in the first CRECER 2007, maybe not. We were just still debating. No large company in the country had adopted the IFRS, but today most have. So the debate is how to adopt the IFRS, if adopt them well, gradually, fully. There are countries that have national standards that are not the IFRS yet, so we have to say that they have to be more transparent than private companies. One important point is the fund lenders, the CAF, the World Bank, the IDB, require financial statements under the IFRS. And in Latin America, we know if they use them or not. What helped a lot is when the U.S. accepted companies that produce IFRS not to have in their capital market, not to have the reconciliation with the U.S. GAAP. This made it easier for Latin American companies to start using the IFRS rather than the U.S. GAAP. This was a great trigger. It is challenging. I mentioned the case of OSEC in Uruguay. They apply the IFRS. The bank internationally, through several projects, has supported specifically effort in public companies to adopt the IFRS, which are projects like, for the long term. But these are strategic projects because the capacity of managing the company more modern, having more qualitative information, but also getting to the markets. Because if a believable accounting standard cannot be linked to the international stock market with the benefits that it brings. You talked about the interest rate, 4.5. And for the market, this is the other part of your question, are the audits. I think that today, the international standards, we have, I don't know if the controllers are here, but these are important institutions, are very constitutional. These positions is usually the controllers, for instance, in Africa. And many of the controllers' office audit public companies. But that would depend on the General Controller's Office of Canada, which is highly respected, runs some audits of public companies, and they do it well, but they also delegate to auditing companies to run these IFRS audits. So I think in general, the situation in which the Controller's Office audits the statements of commercial entities is not the rule. It's basically the exception. In general, the model is that these companies, as their peers in their private sector and internationally, are audited by firms that are appointed by a board of directors based on a rigorous process. Rotation, well, that's a different issue, but it's good that sometimes to reassess the need or not to rotate or to turn over. The World Bank has no official position about this, but we do it so for our external auditors in the World Bank to make sure that there is transparency. So it would be very good, and I have seen this adopted. The auditor's opinion, what has the disclosure of the critical audit issues, which is, I am sure you have to include them because you are public entities, the requirements of the IFRS, but this applies also for the public entities in the stock market. I think for SOEs that have reached an important level of development, this is a very interesting measure. The fact that they are audited by auditing company doesn't mean that the accountant general cannot meet the auditors to learn about this. It depends on the powers that the Constitution and the law give to the controller's office. But I think that the profile that has to be used in the accountability of SOEs points to the company, the public companies. The four that I mentioned, the two that are represented here and the other two, are subject to the regulations of the stock market, which is a way to bring discipline to them and bring a very high transparent framework. I don't know if I answered your question.
Thank you very well. Thank you very much to all of you, to the audience, and to Alvaro, Arismendi, and Henri. So I think we can applaud our panelists for their interventions. Yes, I think we had a very informative discussion with all of you, and so I need to give you a few messages before I let you go. So I need to remind you that at 5:20 we are leaving for the social event from the conference. So the meeting point is in the lobby. And with this, I will thank our panelists again. I will thank you all last time, and I hope you have a great rest of the conference.
Gracias. Gracias, Emelina.
Gracias, thank you.